Scene: aerial shot of the Australian bush at twilight, fading into a close-up of a wombat emerging from a hole. To understand how a wombat operates, you have to look at the anatomy of an athlete hidden inside the body of a keg. While they might look like they spend most of their time idling, the wombat is actually a marvel of evolutionary specialization. Everything about their physical build is a direct response to the challenges of the Australian environment. The reverse pouch. Engineering 101A's marsupials, wombats carry their young in a pouch. But there's a massive design flaw if you're a burrowing animal with a front-opening pocket. Every time you dig, you'd be shoveling a face full of dirt directly onto your joey. Evolution, however, is a pretty decent engineer. Wombats have a backward-facing pouch. The opening points toward their hind legs, protected by that reinforced cartilage shield we talked about earlier. This allows the mother to excavate tons of earth with her powerful front claws without ever putting her offspring at risk of being buried alive. It's a simple, elegant solution to a high-pressure lifestyle. The boulder with a turbocharger. There's a common misconception that because wombats are stout, they're slow. In reality, a wombat is essentially a 30-kilogram muscle brick. They have a low center of gravity and incredibly powerful limbs. Most of the time, they conserve energy, moving with a steady, economical waddle. But if they're startled or feel threatened, they can activate a turbo mode that catches most predators and people completely off guard. A wombat can hit speeds of up to 40 kilometers per hour in short bursts. To put that in perspective, that's faster than the average human can sprint. Imagine a furry bowling ball coming at you at the speed of a suburban car. It's a formidable display of raw power. The three architects, it's important to note that we aren't just talking about one single animal. There are actually 3 distinct species of wombat, each with its own vibe and habitat. First, you've got the common wombat, often called the bare-nosed wombat. These are the ones you'll likely see in the cooler forested regions of New South Wales, Victoria, and Tassie. Then we have the hairy-nosed varieties. The southern hairy-nosed wombat is the desert specialist, thriving in the arid Nullarbor plain by being even more efficient with water and heat management. But the real story is the northern hairy-nosed wombat. This species is one of the rarest mammals on the planet. At one point, their population dropped to just 30 individuals. Thanks to intensive, science-based conservation efforts and protected habitats like Epping Forest National Park in Queensland, their numbers have clawed back into the hundreds. They are the ultimate testament to why understanding ethology and ecology matters. If we don't understand the specific needs of these engineers, we can't save them. Living on the edge of energy, the Australian bush isn't exactly a buffet. The native grasses that wombats eat are tough, fibrous, and remarkably low in nutrients. To survive on this low-octane fuel, the wombat has developed one of the slowest metabolic rates in the animal kingdom. It takes roughly 8 to 14 days for a meal to pass through a wombat's system. This slow-motion digestion allows them to extract every possible drop of moisture and every scrap of energy from the dry vegetation. Because they're so efficient, they don't actually need to spend that much time foraging above ground where they're vulnerable. They eat, they return to the safety of the bunker, and they let their internal chemistry do the heavy lifting. The bulldozer reputation farmers and regional residents often have a bit of a love-hate relationship with our digging friends. Wombats don't really do obstacles. If a fence is in the way of their established path, they don't usually try to go over it. They go through it. They are known for being incredibly stubborn. If they've decided a path is theirs, a bit of wire mesh isn't going to stop them. This has earned them the nickname, the bulldozer of the bush. However, savvy landowners are starting to use wombat gates, small, swinging flaps in fences that allow the wombats to pass through without destroying the infrastructure. It's a perfect example of how we can coexist with wildlife by working with their natural behavior rather than against it. The wombat is a reminder that you don't need to be the biggest or the fiercest to be the master of your domain. You just need the right tools, a bit of grit, and a world-class set of blueprints. Thanks for joining us for this look at Australia's most underrated survivalist. Don't forget to leave a comment if you've ever had a close encounter with a bush bulldozer. We'll see you in the next deep dive. While we've looked at the physical power and the structural engineering of the wombat, their social lives reveal a different kind of complexity. To a casual observer, a wombat seems like a solitary hermit, a grumpy boulder that wants nothing more than to be left alone in the dark. But the truth is, their social networks are as intricate as their tunnel systems. Wombats aren't strictly social in the way a wolf pack is, but they aren't entirely antisocial either. In areas with high-quality grazing, multiple wombats might have overlapping home ranges. While they usually occupy separate burrows, they often share the same main roads, the well-worn tracks leading from burrow entrances to prime feeding grounds. They communicate through a sophisticated language of scent and sound. A low-frequency growl or a sharp hiss is usually enough to settle a territorial dispute without any actual fisticuffs, the wombatiform connection. To understand the wombat's place in the world, we have to look back at their family tree. Wombats belong to the suborder Wombatiforms, a group they share with only one other living relative, the koala. Despite one living in the treetops and the other living in the basement, they share a common ancestor from millions of years ago. If you look closely at a koala, you'll see the similarities: the lack of a visible tail, the sturdy build, and that distinctive nose. But while the koala evolved for a low-energy life in the canopy, the wombat became the ultimate terrestrial survivalist. Millions of years ago, their ancestors included the diprotodon, the largest marsupial to ever walk the earth. Imagine a wombat the size of a rhinoceros, and you've got a pretty good idea of the lineage these little diggers are carrying forward. The senses of a subterranean specialist living in the dark has shaped the wombat's sensory world. Their eyesight is frankly pretty average. They don't need to see fine detail when most of their life is spent in a pitch-black tunnel. Instead, they rely on a world of smell and vibration. A wombat's nose is a high-precision instrument. They can detect the scent of a rival or the approach of a predator from a significant distance. Their hearing is equally acute, tuned to the low-frequency thuds of footsteps on the ground above. Inside the burrow, they use their sensitive whiskers, located on their face and even their legs, to navigate tight turns and avoid cave-ins. They aren't just bumping around in the dark. They are reading the earth through touch and scent, the mange crisis. A scientific challenge: we can't talk about the modern wombat without discussing the biggest threat to their survival: sarcoptic mange. This isn't a natural part of the bush. The mites were likely introduced by domestic animals centuries ago. It's a parasitic infection that causes intense itching, skin thickening, and eventually, if left untreated, it can be fatal. But this is where the Australian community has stepped up. Because wombats are so predictable in their habits, using the same holes every day, volunteers and scientists have developed mange flaps. These are simple frames placed over burrow entrances that hold a small dose of medicine. When the wombat enters or leaves, the flap tips applying the treatment to its back. It's a brilliant bit of low-tech citizen science that is saving entire populations across the East Coast. Why the wombat matters: as our climate becomes more unpredictable, the wombat's role as an ecosystem engineer becomes even more critical. Their burrows provide thermal refuge for hundreds of other species during extreme heat waves and fires. The soil they turn over sequesters carbon and helps moisture penetrate deep into the ground. They are the silent maintainers of the Australian landscape. The wombat teaches us that being a superhero of the natural world doesn't require flashy wings or terrifying teeth. Sometimes it just requires a thick skin, a stubborn attitude, and the ability to dig deep when things get tough. They are a link to Australia's prehistoric past and a vital component of its ecological future. Thank you for sticking with us through this three-part journey into the world of the underground engineer. If you've learned something new about our square pooping, tunnel digging, bulldozer behaving icons, give the video a like and share it with someone who thinks wombats are just cute. There's a lot more to these animals than meets the eye. Stay curious, respect the bush, and we'll see you in the next documentary. To wrap up our look at this Australian icon, we need to talk about the sheer physics of their existence. If you've ever tried to dig a hole in the Australian outback during the height of summer, you'll know the ground can be like concrete. Yet, a wombat moves through it with the ease of a hot knife through butter. How? It's all in the biomechanical design of their front end. A wombat's skeleton is built for torque, not speed. They're humorous. The upper arm bone is incredibly broad and short, providing massive attachment points for muscles that are, pound for pound, some of the strongest in the mammal world. When they dig, they don't just scratch at the surface. They use a brace and heave technique. They plant their wide back feet, lock their core, and use their spade-like claws to tear through clay and rock. While a European badger might dig for a quick meal, the wombat is building a permanent fortress. It's a comparison between a temporary campsite and a high-rise foundation. The intelligence of a specialist. There's an old myth in the bush that wombats aren't the brightest sparks in the fire. People see them walking into fences or ignoring cars and assume they're a bit dim. In reality, what we're seeing is an animal with a singular focus. They aren't dumb. They are highly specialized. Studies in captive environments have shown that wombats are remarkably good at problem solving, particularly when it relates to spatial navigation. They have an incredible long-term memory for geography. A wombat can remember the exact location of a hole in a fence or a hidden burrow entrance years after they last visited it. Their brains are wired for the long game. They don't react to every little stimulus because, in their world, if you're built like a tank and live in a bunker, most things just aren't your problem. The water-wise warrior in a country defined by drought, the wombat is a master of resource management. While a kangaroo has to travel huge distances to find water during a dry spell, the wombat often stays put. They have one of the lowest water requirements of any mammal their size. Most of their hydration comes from the dew on the grass and the moisture held within the roots they excavate, because they spend about 20 hours a day in the high humidity environment of their burrows. They lose very little water through evaporation. They are essentially living in a self-contained recycling system. This efficiency is why you can find wombats in some of the harshest, driest parts of the continent, where other mammals would struggle to last a week. It's not just about being tough, it's about being incredibly efficient. Correcting the vicious narrative, you might see videos online of angry wombats chasing people, framed as though they're the honey badgers of the South. It's important to clear this up. Wombats are not naturally aggressive. They are territorial and defensive. Most attacks involve a wombat trying to get from point A to point B, and humans standing in the way of point B. They have a very direct way of interacting with the world. If they feel cornered, they will use that powerful head to charge, essentially a 30 kilograms muscle shove to the shins. But they aren't out looking for a blue. They are generally peaceful, solitary herbivores that just want to be left to their engineering projects. Respecting their space isn't just about safety, it's about acknowledging the dignity of a wild animal that has been refining its way of life for millions of years. The legacy of the diggerers, we look to the future of conservation in Australia. The wombat stands as a symbol of resilience. They have survived the arrival of predators, the clearing of land, and the extremes of the Australian climate. They are a constant, quiet force, the literal foundation of the bush. By understanding the wombat, we understand the importance of the unseen parts of our wilderness. We learn that sometimes the most important work happens underground, out of sight, and without any fanfare. They aren't just the digger nobody expected. They are the diggers we absolutely cannot afford to lose. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the ethology and evolution of the wombat, cheers for coming along for the ride. We've covered everything from cube-shaped scat to the physics of the bum shield, and I hope you walk away with a newfound respect for Australia's premier underground engineer. Make sure to keep an eye out for those square blocks next time you're in the scrub. It's a sign that one of the toughest architects on Earth is nearby. See you later. As we reach the end of our journey into the world of the subterranean engineer, we have to look at the reality of living alongside them. For those of us who call Australia home, or for the thousands who visit our national parks every year, the wombat isn't just a documentary subject. It's a neighbour, and like any good neighbour, there are a few unwritten rules of engagement we need to follow to keep both ourselves and the animals safe. The living boulder and road safety if you're doing a bit of a road trip through the high country or the coastal scrub at dawn or dusk. You're in prime wombat territory. Because they are low to the ground and have that incredibly dense bone and muscle build, hitting a wombat isn't like hitting a tumbleweed. It's more like hitting a stationary boulder. It can do serious damage to a vehicle, and obviously, it's devastating for the animal. The best practical advice? Slow down during those crepuscular hours. The transition between day and night. If you do see a wombat on the roadside, don't assume it will move. Their instinct, when threatened, isn't always to run. It's often to hunker down and rely on that biological shield. Give them a wide berth and plenty of time to waddle off the bitumen. If the worst does happen and you find an injured animal or a deceased mother, the most important thing you can do, if it's safe to pull over, is to check the pouch. Because wombats are so sturdy, a joey can often survive inside the mother's pouch for quite a while after an accident. Calling a local wildlife rescue group like WIRES or a regional equivalent can turn a tragedy into a second chance at life. The ethics of the encounter, it's incredibly tempting when you see a chunky wombat grazing by the side of a trail, to want to get close or offer them a snack. But here's the scientific reality. Human food is essentially poison to a wombat's highly specialized digestive system. Things like bread or carrots can lead to a painful and often fatal condition called lumpy jaw, or cause nutritional deficiencies that weaken their immune systems against things like mange. The best way to appreciate a wombat is through a long lens. Ethical wildlife viewing means staying back far enough that the animal doesn't stop eating. If they lift their head and stare at you, you're too close. By keeping your distance, you're helping them stay wild and preventing them from becoming habituated, which is when animals lose their natural fear of humans and cars, often leading to dangerous encounters down the track. Becoming a citizen scientist, you don't need a PhD in ecology to help protect these animals. One of the most effective tools we have today is citizen science. Apps like Wombat allow everyday people to log sightings of wombats and, more importantly, sightings of mange. This data goes directly to researchers who are mapping the spread of the disease and coordinating treatment efforts. By simply taking a photo from a distance and hitting upload, you're providing the raw data that helps scientists save the species. It's a way for all of us to give back to the engineers that keep our bush healthy. The silent custodian at the end of the day, the wombat represents a side of Australia that we often overlook. They aren't flashy, they aren't deadly in the way the media loves to portray our wildlife, and they don't seek out the spotlight. They are quiet, industrious, and incredibly resilient. They remind us that there is a whole world happening beneath our boots, a complex network of tunnels, a cycle of soil renewal, and a legacy of survival that stretches back to the time of giants. In a world that often feels like it's moving too fast, there's something grounding about the wombat. They remind us to slow down, to dig deep, and to focus on the things that actually matter, like building a solid foundation and looking after the neighborhood. The Australian bush wouldn't be the same without them. They aren't just an animal. They are a force of nature. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the incredible life of the wombat. If this series has changed the way you look at these bulldozers of the bush, let us know in the comments. We're dedicated to bringing you the real science and the untold stories of the natural world, keeping the legends alive and the myths in check. Respect the wildlife, look after the land, and we'll catch you on the next one. Juday.